Welcome to The Truth is Out There, where we dig to find resources to help us become enlightened and responsible users of information. Today's topic is hidden agendas in media. The truth is out there, and we'll help you find it. So what hidden agendas are we talking about? There's more to evaluating sources than just looking for fact or fiction. We as consumers need to look at how these facts and information are being presented. How something is presented can really influence how readers interpret the news. This has something to do with implicit bias. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. This is often what leads journalists and news platforms astray. We all have implicit bias, whether we know it or not. But journalists and news are supposed to be objective. So what do we do when we all have this same human flaw? Well, it's important to know what kind of bias can even exist. What are we even looking for? Gender and racial bias is often seen in crime reporting. Crimes are often reported on differently depending on who the victim or the criminal is. And the same can be said for gender. News stories about women are often very different than news stories about men. Bias can also be political. Depending on what news source you're reading, they might have a bias towards conservatives or a bias towards liberals, and this can skew how they present certain ideas or stories. See where your favorite news platform lands on this political media bias chart. This is from All Sides and was created in 2019. We can see that there's a center column, and these are going to be the most unbiased news sources. These ratings are based only on online content, so not TV, print, or radio. So the center column features things like NPR Online, The Hill, USA Today, Wall Street Journal Online. So these are going to be the most unbiased. And then we can see that the chart splits. We have our soft right and then our hard right. These are going to lean more towards the conservative politics. And then on the left side, we have our soft left and our hard left, and these lean more towards liberal politics. What I like about this chart is it specifically indicates when it's talking about the news and when it's talking about the opinion. So we can see that in the right column, Fox News Online is in the soft right, and then in the hard right, it's Fox News Opinion. So opinions and the news are often very different, and so good news sources clearly state which is which. So now that we know what kind of agendas there are, what can we really do about it? We as consumers can learn to read through this bias to evaluate news and information responsibly. But first, let's take a look at what people are saying is an issue with their news. This infographic is from Statista, one of our databases here at the library, and this is a poll of 37 countries across the world on what they think is the issue with their news. So 42% say poor journalism, factual mistakes, dumbed-down stories, and clickbait. 39% say stories where facts are twisted to push an agenda. These are two major issues that often have to do with our own internal biases and the way that information is presented and the way that the masses are processing that information. So we can see that fake news isn't really a top concern for people, but poor journalism is people's number one concern. So how do we look past that poor journalism and the implicit bias, and what are we really looking for when we are trying to evaluate media bias? So we as the readers can learn the tools to read through implicit bias of major media outlets to evaluate and consume news responsibly. So things we always want to look at are language. Words hold a lot of power, so make sure the language isn't evoking stereotypes or leading the readers. Is it full of phrases that are just getting the readers riled up? Or is it laying out the news in an unbiased, factual way? How are they describing people and places? The words and language used in news stories can really indicate and can really change how people are reading it and analyzing it. Another thing to look at is omission or emphasis. In partnership with the language, Look at what's missing from the story or what is added to the story. Look at what facts they're emphasizing and what they don't seem to be saying. You'll also want to look at photos, imagery, and video. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, but does the image they use seem appropriate for the story? Does it seem outdated, or does the photo seem cropped? Maybe there's something else happening that we're not seeing. It's important that the photo fits with the story. Another thing to look at are headlines. A headline is supposed to grab the reader's attention, but make sure that it's not bending the truth. Does the headline give a well-rounded view of the story, or does it just shock and awe for clickbait? One of the last things is statistics and numbers. Data is always interpreted to tell a story, but how those numbers are interpreted and what numbers are left out can really change how we think about the results. We always want to make sure that the statistics and the numbers are real and that the study was done in an ethical way. But what numbers they choose to provide in news stories and what numbers they choose to leave out can really paint a false image of a set of statistics. So we know what to look for, but let's try and compare some examples of news stories found in online media. Our first news story comes from CBS Denver and is in reference to the Aurora movie theater shootings from 2012. James Holmes was the person who committed this crime, and this news story is about him. The headline says, "Theater shooting suspect was brilliant science student," and then that is immediately followed by a photo of him that looks like it was maybe a yearbook photo or a senior class photo. Let's look at our second news story. This is from MSNBC and is in reference to Trayvon Martin, who was shot and killed in Florida also in 2012. Trayvon was the victim of this crime. The headline says, "Trayvon Martin was suspended 3 times from school." Immediately under that, there's a video of his mother, and there's no photo of Trayvon Martin. Both news stories were posted after the crime has happened. So how do you think these headlines compare? And what does the imagery on this first story, how does this photo make you feel? What do you think the purposes of the second news story were? Why was it written? Those are just 2 stories in a large world of news, but knowing that media is often not as unbiased as we are led to believe, it should make you think more critically about why things are reported on and how they're reported on. I like to say that nothing is created or done for no reason. So think about all of this next time you glance at the news. Think about how those 2 stories compared and why they were written. So now that we know that hidden agendas exist and we all have implicit bias and we know what tools to use to look through it, what additional resources can help us with this? So what can we do to help fight implicit bias? Finding resources to help cut down on implicit bias can make us more responsible information consumers. Some of the few things that I have found helpful are things like this newsletter, The Flip Side, as it's tough to keep up with politics these days, so we do the work for you. They scour 30+ publications to find the most thoughtful and informed perspectives on major issues. They make sure that you're getting a well-rounded view of the political sides and political issues in our world today. We know, due to the media bias chart, that if we only read certain news sources, we are stuck in our own little political bubbles. Other people say it keeps me grounded in reality, not just in my bubble. If you only get one perspective, it feeds the outrage machine. And it helps have civil discussions with people that maybe don't inherently agree with you. There are a lot of newsletters that will do this. Another tool that exists is something called NewsGuard. the Internet Trust Tool. NewsGuard uses journalism to fight false news, misinformation, and disinformation. And they research news brands to help readers, viewers know which ones are legitimate and which ones are not. This is a plugin for your internet browser, and then when you Google different topics, a little green plus sign or a red minus sign will show up in those results to show you very quickly that something has been passed through the NewsGuard test and something did not pass through the NewsGuard test. So why trust them? They're trained journalists because they are totally transparent and they're not collecting any of your personal information. They are just here to help us analyze and navigate news effectively. They show us things like funding, parent companies, and stuff that might be kind of hard to find. So things like NewsGuard and the flip side can help us expand past our own personal opinions and our own bubble and our own implicit bias to make sure that we're getting well-rounded stories and a well-rounded view of the world today. Learning to read through our own biases can be tough. If you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to a librarian here at Maryville. You can use the 24/7 library chat, or you can email reference@maryville.edu. Remember, the truth is out there, we just need to know how to find it.